Hello, hello. Welcome to the Mother Daze podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sarah Wright Olson.
And I'm Teresa Palmer.
Hi, Daisies. All right. We are so excited that we have to jump in right away because we want to get to our amazing guest today. Kathryn Taylor is the author of the Babydust Method. They also have an amazing Facebook group with over 20-something thousand members. And Kathryn has a degree in microbiology, immunology. Oh my gosh, how do you say that? Immunology. That's amazing. And molecular genetics from UCLA. Kathryn started researching variables affect whether an X or Y sperm fertilizes an egg. And then Kathryn introduces a natural sex selection approach known as the Babydust Method. And so we are so excited to have her here today so that we can talk all about this. Teresa, let's jump in.
Yes. Hi, Kathryn. How are you?
Hey. Good. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was doing some lurking on the Babydust Method Facebook page because I actually joined as a member, I think in 2018. I had a friend of mine recommend your book to me. I was really excited to dive in and just read about the research. And the other day I was scrolling through the page and I love the community that you have over there on Facebook. And it's just everyone's so supportive of each other. And it's almost like everyone's lifting each other up and motivating. And so I was reading through and I saw that you mentioned that you were speaking on a podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the person. Oh my God, we're going to have Kathryn on. Like, what a perfect person to have on our podcast. I feel so excited to have you. I thought I might jump in a little bit about how I came to find you and my relationship with your work. Okay, so I was really blessed and lucky to have two healthy, gorgeous little boys, Bodhi, followed by Forrest. And I'd never heard of the term gender disappointment, which it's funny, despite its name, gender disappointment, it actually refers to the grief or the disappointment when the biological sex of the baby doesn't align with what you hope for. Gender obviously is an identity that isn't known until a child is old enough to identify with a gender. So parents typically assume that like a baby's gender is going to match with their biological sex. And I remember at the time, right before I got pregnant, my husband, who already had a son, was like, you and I are having a daughter. We're going to have a baby girl and her name is Indigo. We're having Indigo Love Palmer. This was her name. And then we tried to get pregnant and we got pregnant. I remember we went to the first ultrasound together and we're like, oh, we're going to see Indigo today. And then like we went and the baby was happy, healthy little heartbeat. Then we went to the 12-week scan and they were like, oh, I think you're having a little boy. That looks like little boy bits. And Mark was like, no, oh, a boy? No, it's a girl, right? Are you sure it's a boy? It's a girl. And then they were like, no, definitely a boy. And I remember probably for about 3 hours when I got home, I was like, oh, okay, well, I had this dream that like we already have Isaac and I had this dream that we were going to have Indigo now. And I realized that it was such a fantasy that I had to break up with. It was like the grief of breaking up with the fantasy of like, first we had a little boy and then now we're having a little girl together. And a lot of my thoughts and feelings came up from, oh, well, will Mark be as attached to this baby as he is to his first son? And now I can look back and like, giggle at myself, but it was my first experience. I know that they were irrational thoughts, but they were real thoughts. And I think it's important to say that there's so much shame surrounding like having any thoughts but like gratitude for having a healthy pregnancy and having a healthy baby. And at that time, I remember thinking, I wanted to Mark to have a different experience with this child. And of course, fast forward all these years later, Bodhi couldn't be more different from Isaac. Mark has the most incredible relationship with Bodhi. And then I remember after having him, I was in such a bubble of obsessiveness and just love and just this fog of I cannot love anything more than I love this little person. His biological sex was so irrelevant to me. But then when I got pregnant the next time, I was like, well, I kind of just want to have a boy because I know how much I love Bodhi. And again, he came out and he's so his own person, and biological sex has nothing to do with it. And I was so in love with having these little dudes, these little people, so different from each other. I mean, all three boys are so different from each other. But I couldn't help but have the little feeling in the back of my mind, what would it be like to parent a daughter? What would it be like to say oh, I have a daughter? And I grew up as an only child, just me and my mum. So I had this fantasy of what that would be like. And I didn't know if it would be any different, but I had a yearning to experience it. So that's how I found you, Kathryn, and the Babydust Method.
Thanks so much for sharing your story. And yours is just like any other story we have in the group. I mean, it's such a common thing, having this expectation or even just a wish that you may have a gender, a certain gender, because it is beyond just boy or girl. It's all the memories and feelings and thoughts that we have, whether it's having grown up with, like you said, with your mom and those amazing memories you have, the bond that you have with her being a girl, having her be a womanly figure to you. And there's so much connected for each person, and everyone has so many reasons why they want a boy or a girl. And I think one that comes up often is a lot of females in the group joining in order to conceive a girl. Believe it or not, it is the most, maybe twice as common as the desire for a boy just in the group. And I think the number one reason why people want a girl first, you think it might be, they want a ballerina or the bows and dresses, but so often I hear it's to relive or recreate that relationship they have with their mother, either from their childhood, those positive memories, or even just their mother has recently passed away and they just are yearning for that connection. So it can be so much deeper than just the superficial things we associate with gender. So thanks for sharing your story. It's so common.
Yeah. And it's funny. I stumbled across your book, and then I got to join the community. So when you get the book, you read it and it's so thorough. It's so well researched. It's so thorough. And it really made sense to me what you were saying. And we thought let's just try and see. And we're so content with what we have and our little family. Even if we're blessed to have another baby, let's just try and see. So I had my husband follow the protocol as much as I followed the protocol. And then when we found out that we were having a girl, in my head, I was like, it worked. Oh my gosh, it worked. This worked. And I started being the cheerleader for your work, because whenever I meet someone nowadays, because it's such a funny thing because people keep it very, very secretive. And I've had so many comments from people being like, oh my gosh, you had 2 boys and then you had 2 girls. Wow, that's incredible. And I was like, yeah, do you know what's funny? I mean, take it or leave it. I followed this book and I sort of followed it to a T. And in my head, I believe, I'm such a big believer in manifesting, and I just I feel like my children are the children I'm meant to have. But at the same time, it didn't hurt us to follow these methods and to go through it. And for us, in my head, it worked. So I feel like I'm always sharing your book and this community with so many people that I meet in the little quiet whispers that you have between each other. And I can see it in their face, and I know that they want to ask. And it's such a funny thing. I think it feels even more taboo to talk about any kind of longing for a baby of a particular biological sex, because we're in such a wonderful progressive place in life where gender is so much more complex. And obviously gender is influenced by instinct and culture and society and more, that sometimes it is breaking up with the idea of these stereotypes. Like, what would it be like to raise a little girl? What would it be like to raise a little boy? And, I will say in my experience, it's not that different to me. It feels really, I don't know, Sarah, if you can relate to that, but the personalities for me are the biggest differences. I'm like, Bodhi, like Forrest and Poet are the most similar in terms of their play and the fantasy worlds that they dive into. And, one is a biological girl and one is a biological boy. But before I had that, there was this fantasy that it was going to be completely different raising a little girl than it would be raising a little boy.
Yeah. So my experience was that I actually, in my head, because I had a little brother growing up, I really wanted to have a boy first. And so it was like a total... I, of course, was like, either way, it's fine, just a healthy baby. But then, of course, like in my deepest of deep heart, I really wanted to have a boy. And of course, I ended up getting pregnant with a boy and I was so over the moon. But then when I was going to have my second, I really wanted to have a girl. And then, I remember getting the phone call of like, it's from my doctor. And when he said girl, I had told myself like, either way, it's fine. Either way, it's fine. And as soon as he said girl, I burst into tears and I was like, oh my gosh, I really wanted to have a girl. So I was just like so excited. And then of course, when I was having my third, I was like, whatever, I don't know. But what's crazy is that before I went to have my daughter, I remember you talking about this stuff and you telling me like just a really simple, which is why I want to ask Kathryn exactly how it works, because it was like a really simple of like, okay, you have to have sex for like a couple of days before ovulation or like closer to ovulation. And so I did whatever you told me to do to have a girl, and I ended up getting pregnant with a girl. So I was like, this totally works. It's so cool. So Kathryn, I wanted to ask you, how did you get into this work? Like what brought you to this place?
Thanks for asking. I get that question all the time because it is kind of an unusual line of work to pursue. I started in the sciences at UCLA and was heavy into research in my undergrad and graduate school. And then when it came time to start a family on my own, just like both of you, you're kind of fantasizing about, gosh, I'd love to have a boy first or a girl first for whatever reason. And so that really kicked off kind of combining my love of starting my own family with also my background in science. And I was hyper focused on combing through all of the available research. I went through every database of studies that had been published, both in animal and human studies, taking a look at the timing of intercourse relative to ovulation, various ovulation detection methods, and then also diets and even other kind of maybe outside the normal scientific methods. But I looked through every single bit of research that was available to me. And through all that research, I was able to compile what I thought was kind of a meta-analysis, if you will, of all of the studies together. And that's how I came up with the Babydust Method. And I'll say that, I did also heavily dive into the Shettles method, which was the prevailing method prior to mine. Mm-hmm. He was a OBGYN who wrote his method in the 1970s, so over 50 years ago. And it was based on his own anecdotal evidence of timing versus intercourse and of intercourse versus ovulation. And but there were several flaws in his method. The science really hadn't caught up. There wasn't a prevailing ovulation detection method at the time. He advised using, cervical mucus checks and temperature, and not a very straightforward way to explain how to find the timing that you need. So all of the science combined with the prevailing instructions out there, I felt like there was really a need to make the science easy to understand to the general public, and also to make the method and the usage much more user-friendly. So that's what inspired me. And then I tried the method on myself twice. It worked. Started using it with, I was like, okay, that's the first proof. And then I did it with family and friends, and it started having kind of a local excitement about it. And then I wrote the book. So it really was born from a passion of mine, a personal interest, as well as my own background and my career, and then just needing to get the information out to the public. So.
Oh, wow. How amazing. And now I see your enthusiasm on Facebook when someone comes out and they're so excited and they've had this positive experience. And it's just like people are so filled up with joy and they've really followed your method. So for anyone out there listening who maybe is thinking probably quite quietly, not telling their friends, because usually most people just be like, oh, it doesn't matter, I don't care if it's a boy or a girl, but there's this like deep, like what Sarah was saying, like this deep little like wanting of a particular biological sex child. What would be like the first, what's the most important thing? Would you say timing, or is it just like pinpointing the ovulation? I also love the try one time method if you're going for a girl, because that I accidentally swayed for prairie. And that's how I wrote to you, Kathryn, was that I really accidentally got pregnant with prairie. Like we were not trying. We wanted a fourth baby, but not at that time. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. But then when I looked back, I was like, oh, wow, I have done the Babydust method without really realizing it. And I will say it wasn't perfect because I wasn't like checking my ovulation. I was kind of guessing when my ovulation was. But we had our shebang on cycle day 10 for me. And I'm actually a really late ovulator. I tend to ovulate like cycle day 18 or cycle day 19. So we thought cycle day 10 was more than in the clear. And we only did it one time. My husband like got on a plane and like left to go to America the next day. And I found out I was pregnant and I was like, oh my gosh. So I went back onto Babydust Method just to like guess what, and I was like, I reckon this is a girl, because it was one time, it was so far from my ovulation. I don't even know when I ovulated. Maybe it was just a little bit earlier that month. And then sure enough, I went and did the sneak peek gender test, which is a blood test. And it said girl. And it made me even more set on your method, because I was like, this was an accident and I got a girl. And I could not have been further away from my ovulation if I tried. And it was only one attempt.
Oh my gosh, I hear that all the time, that people have accidentally done the method, or, oh gosh, I can see why I have 6 boys or 6 girls. Because what's so funny is couples do sort of fall into a regular pattern, not always consistently, but that sometimes explains for those families of like 13 boys. And you'll say, gosh, that defies all the odds. He must just make all boys. But really, we fall into these patterns over the years, right? And some of it, at least, can be explained by accidentally doing the method, to your point.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Okay, so is there a way that you can describe your method without getting into the ins and outs of it for people listening, so that they're interested enough? You guys have to get the book though, because the book is really specific. And you can have like the key points, but you really need the details of it, because with Poet, we were very into the details. We followed that thing to a T, and I was very committed to this experience. And Mark laughs at it now, because he was like, oh, we weren't just like having sex to like make love and have a baby. Like Teresa was on a mission, which I was. I was on such a mission. I had all the steps lined out. I had it all printed out. And then I was like, okay, we're going to try this with 100% of us. And it worked. So for our listeners, what are a few key tips like for boy swaying and girl swaying that you can share with us?
Absolutely. And to your point, you just highlighted how important it is to really follow the steps, because we get this all the time in the group that someone will say, oh, well, I didn't really follow the steps, or I didn't really read the whole book. I just skimmed it. And there's so many little things that really go into making sure you've done it all correctly as per the method. But just to give a quick overview, it is both timing and frequency of intercourse relative to ovulation. And you must use ovulation tests to accurately detect your ovulation, as you mentioned, your cycle that time with this really long cutoff, we call it, which is the distance between intercourse and the ovulation date. Really, you can vary quite a bit. And especially you may think, you're looking at a period app, and if you have a 28-day cycle, that you'll automatically ovulate on day 14. Not the case. I ovulate closer to day 18 or 20 sometimes, like you mentioned. So really important to track with ovulation tests. And then the other two components are the timing and the frequency. So the timing is the specific date that you have intercourse relative to ovulation, and the frequency is the number of times per cycle. So I'll just say, the timing is very precise compared to ovulation, but the frequency I'll share, for a girl, it's 1 time prior to ovulation. And for a boy, it's 2 times right on ovulation. And it's much more specific in the book, but that's the gist of it. So for your listeners, if you think back to the pregnancies you've had, and gosh, maybe that was kind of a boy sway accidentally. We were really active that cycle, right? Or maybe, he was out of town for 2 weeks. There's no way we did it more than once. So you can really analyze a lot of sways retrospectively, even without the tests or the data. And you'll see that a lot of babies have been conceived in this exact same manner.
And is diet part of it too? Like what you're eating or what your partner is eating? I mean, I've heard there's all of these sort of tips out there where it's like, oh, you should be eating, your husband should be eating oysters, or you should be eating this, or is there any sort of method to that as well?
That's a great question, and it comes up a lot. I also address it in the book. The reason there was so much buzz about diet, and of course, in general society, there's always a new diet to try, and I think people are eager to hop on that bandwagon, right? But there was a study published by Dr. Norlander, I believe about 10 years ago, and she looked at eating certain foods in relation to what the subsequent gender was. And what she found was, and she divided it into eating kind of dairy and calcium, and then eating more, I believe, like salt and more heavy meat products. She divided it up, and she found no difference between the two. She only found a difference when she added timing and frequency to it.
Wow.
And people forget to look at the second part of the conclusion in that study, but I put it in the book to highlight that diet not only does nothing, but here's another proof that timing and frequency does.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating.
But funny how the misconceptions they travel fast, right?
They do. I mean, but that is crazy, because you're like, okay, I'm supposed to eat, like, I don't even know if this is a thing, but I was eating a bunch of spicy foods. Yeah, exactly. Or gosh, I was eating a lot of donuts that time and I got a girl.
I used to hear to get a girl, like, you should be more acidic because the acids like burn off the boy sperm. and then it's like more alkaline, like favors a boy. That's what I used to like back in the day when I was like really looking into this. I will say, someone said to me recently, oh, the reason you've got boy, boy, girl, girl, like, oh, it seems like you've planned this. And I was like, well, I didn't actually plan it, but I did have some thinking did go into it. Like, and also I'm a big manifestor too. And I always was like, my 2 sons and then my 2 daughters. And then if my manifesting works, then I would have a boy next. But anyway, someone did say to me recently, oh, it's because you're vegan. You had girls next. And I was like, oh, okay. Is that true? So why don't we look at all the vegans in the world and see if they only have girls? Do vegans only exclusively have girls? I don't think so. It's so funny. Everyone, like, the people who will come out and be like, oh, do it like this. This is how I got a boy. Or do it like this is how I got a girl. But it's been so interesting, because like, for you, I want to hear like how this work has changed. And I know you're such an advocate for people feeling feelings, like the longing to have an experience, whether or not it's a fantasy in their mind. The longing is still real, and the heart wants what the heart wants. And I think that we need to really like shine a light on the fact that the gender disappointment, it's sort of an unfortunate term because gender obviously means something else, especially these days when there's so much more conversation surrounding it. But it's a real feeling. And it's like I was saying, that dirty little secret that people keep to themselves because of shame. And now, of course, there's such a beautiful movement towards like gender inclusivity and eradicating gender stereotypes that it's almost like it's probably made your work even more challenging. And I see on your Facebook page, like so many more people are anonymous and feeling like they can't share these things. Could you just speak to that for a second? Because obviously you'll always hear like, well, you should just be grateful to have a baby. You should be just grateful that you can even get pregnant, especially from those couples who are struggling with infertility. I have two friends in particular who one's just had a baby and one is about to have a baby. And both of them wanted the opposite gender of what they had. They had a dream of the opposite gender of what they're pregnant with. And it was such a like quiet little whispered thing to me, like, oh, I'm feeling these feelings, but like, please don't tell anyone. Can you speak to that for a second? Because I'm sure there are women and men, everyone listening to this being like, I've had those same feelings, but I haven't been able to voice them because you are taught to just feel grateful. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you address that in the online community?
That is such a great question. And I really pride myself in making the Facebook group an inclusive community because people don't have somewhere else to turn to. Even their own family, maybe their own partner does not agree or does not support this feeling. And so the worst thing you can do, especially for a postpartum mom or even pregnant mom, is to chip away at that mental state because it can be so fragile. I would say the biggest bit of support that I see consistently in the group is from other moms sharing their story and normalizing these feelings. And I'll add that when we take it away from the gender expectation, which seems so superficial, right? It seems so not progressive and not politically correct, and how dare you, right? Take it away from that, and I see this so often in the group, and move it towards a loss of expectation. And what I mean by that is similarly with a miscarriage, or I rarely share this. I've shared this a few times, but I did have a baby after my first two who passed away at 1 month old. And I could go on and on. But the point is,
I'm so sorry.
Oh no. And you know what? I am one of millions. But what you will see when people share, and I'm feeling it right now, when you share, not only do you find camaraderie and validation for what you feel, but just as that loss is that I felt that was so real, a real baby in my hands who didn't make it out of the hospital. What you have with these folks is the same thing. It's a loss of an expectation, a loss of a dream, right? So one could say, well, I should just be happy I even conceived that baby, right? And I even got to hold her in my arms because so many can't, right? But to me, that's still a huge loss. And to the folks who wanted a boy or wanted a girl, it's a huge loss. And so when you paint it in that way, where it's not some rainbows and butterflies versus puppy dog tails and baseballs, it's a loss of expectation that you had mapped out for your life that you may never get. It becomes such a heavier and more validating, I guess, or even just something that anyone can relate to. A loss of expectation in life, whether it's the grandmother who died too early and never got a chance to meet her, her daughter's children. I could go on and on, but it's just that loss of expectation. And I think that's where the real support begins. And we remove that superficial gender layer and just move on to loss of expectation.
Yeah, that's a really strong reframe. And thank you so much for sharing your story. That is something that I think every single one of us can just sort of like hold you and love you in that moment. And thank you for sharing. I just saw something the other day, a woman who said, I had a miscarriage, I had a pregnancy loss. And the first thing my friend said to me was, oh, well, at least it was, just 8 weeks or something, and then the next thing that somebody said to them was like, well, it's fine because, you weren't even trying that long, and then like, it's so interesting how how the reactions of people around you can do exactly what you said, which is chip away at this sort of fragility, this like vulnerability that we have. These things are happening inside of our bodies. And the moment that you're like peeing on a stick, and you see that second line, you're like, whole life sort of flashes in front of your eyes, right? You're just like, you sort of like fast forward to, wait, what month would the baby be born? Oh my gosh, September. And then they're a Libra. Okay. So that means they're going to be like this. And then, and it's like, you just like see everything. And so, I had a pregnancy loss, and I remember thinking in my head, like all the thing, with those like, first 6-8 weeks that I knew that I was pregnant, it was like, I saw everything, saw this baby's whole life, its interactions with its siblings and like everything. And then the moment that happens, you're like, whoa, it's exactly what you're saying. It's this like loss of expectation. You're grieving this moment. And so it doesn't matter, like, when people say to you, well, at least it was at this, it's none of that stuff. It's like, we have to stop trying to, that's not making it better. That makes it worse. And, anyway.
And it's holding the space for all of these feelings, and they are complicated feelings, but it's okay to have these feelings. They're so normal. And I think like validating someone's experience, and everyone's going to have their own personal way of navigating through like the loss of expectation or breaking up with the dream that they have.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's so wonderful. I'd love to ask you specifically for anyone listening who's like, yeah, you know what? This is making me realize like I did have to squash these feelings of like, oh, I feel sad that I'll never get to like see what it's like to have a daughter, or I'll never get to experience what it's like to have a son. I have a friend of mine who's got like a bunch of daughters, and like she really longed to have a son, and she just sort of moved through that. And then of course she had her like fourth daughter and was like, oh, she's perfect and beautiful and meant to be here. I'd love to hear some success stories that you've seen through your work, how people have been able to make peace with these feelings, and what have you noticed with gender disappointment?
I think so many people come to the Facebook page to, like you said, kind of commiserate and share their feelings. As far as people making progress, I'd say everyone is at a different stage. You have people who just found out yesterday that they're having their fifth boy. They didn't even try the method, but they're coming to the page just to vent, right? And then you have people who are coming back to the page saying, look, here I am on the other side, and look how great and look how loving this, sixth girl is, and what a part of our family she is, and how meant to be she is. And so I would say what I've seen, the greatest thing is the sharing of stories and showing the other side, right? It's so hard. You could have asked me when my baby passed away that like, how do you see your life in the next year? I couldn't even see past the next day. To have someone in front of you, and this is also part of grief support at the hospital that they offer, a wonderfully robust service for infant loss. Of course, nothing for gender disappointment or early loss, right? But I would say that when you can see someone else having gone through the exact same or very similar scenario years in the future, you can begin to get yourself out of what you may feel as a black hole or a deep pit of despair. Honestly, some of the ladies in the group do describe it like that. And you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think it's the sharing of stories. And for example, for your listeners today, hearing everyone, talk about this, normalizing this, going to Facebook groups, Instagram, social media, where you can be anonymous and really be open. You can also not be anonymous as well, but it provides that extra layer of rawness that you need in order to move forward in this journey of loss. So I guess that's the progress I see every day, is people at various points in this journey sharing their insight, kind of like a teacher to a student, like, it will get better. You will eventually make peace with this. And here's how I've done it. And look at me and my family. And this is all part of my journey. And you get such a broader step back and view of life, right? You're in the moment right now. You just got the news. You got your, a boy and you wanted a girl, or vice versa. And you can't even climb out of that darkness. So I would say the greatest thing I see every day is that sharing of motherhood, like you are doing with this podcast, just sharing the stories, normalizing these feelings, and providing a resource for people to vent and share and feel open and supported throughout this journey, because it is not easy.
That is so beautiful. That's so, I love how you articulate that, because I feel like there's going to be just a huge wave of people listening to this feeling so seen, and like they're in a safe place to have feelings, which are otherwise squashed or shamed. And we're in a delicate place right now in society where I feel like there's so much that you have to keep to yourself out of fear of like being judged. And it's such a progressive society, and in really important ways and in really like needed areas. But it's easy to feel like unseen in it, and change is scary and all those things. And like so often I find like people just not sharing their opinions because they're afraid that their opinions will be taken the wrong way. And I did want to say, like, my girlfriend who was wanting one was, had an expectation for her baby to be one biological sex and was the other. Like, she could not imagine it the other way. Now she's just in that love bubble with that baby, enjoying every last little moment of being a mother. And it's like those days just have disappeared when she was in that place where it felt really heavy for her for a while. And it was something that took her a number of months of having to unpack and understand where it's coming from. Is this tied to gender stereotypes, or is there something deeper underneath that? Like, where's the crack? Like, where's these feelings coming from? And really like addressing those on a cellular level, like as deep as possible. And she's in such an amazing place. And I will say, from my perspective as well, because obviously I'm a part of the Facebook group and I see the posts, both success stories and the other kind of success story, which is like, it was a failed sway, but my life is amazing. And I wouldn't want any other little baby than the baby that I got. And I was meant to have this baby. And it's so beautiful to watch that. And I will say that my dream of what it was going to be like to have my 2 boys followed by 2 girls. Yes, my dream, it came to fruition, and I'm living this thing. And sometimes even my parents, they're quite old school. They're like, oh, well, perfect. You don't need any more kids. You've got 2 boys followed by 2 girls. And I'm like, wait, I want to have more kids. But my dream actually wasn't, my fantasy wasn't real. It's so funny now being in it. Like my girls and my boys, it's so like blended. Like, there are some things inherently that the girls seem to gravitate towards, but they're also like, Poet is so like one of the dudes with Forrest and Bodhi, and like is so rough and tumble with the guys, and she's so like not what my expectation of what like parenting a daughter would be. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so funny that the reality of it is just like, they're just people with all their personalities. And 2 of them happen to be born female and 2 of them happen to be born male, but it's like it doesn't actually feel different the way in my head I thought that it would be different. Like, oh, the girls will be the best friends and the boys will be like your heart or whatever it is. That's just not, it didn't end up working out like that. So I wish I could go back to my like 2018 self and be like, hey, don't worry. Like, it's not the way like you envision. Like, it's all going to work out fine.
I think it would be great for you to share that in the Facebook group too, because hearing those stories, like you're one of those examples where it's like, here's how it is, light at the end of the tunnel. Here's me on the other side. I was in your shoes, and now here's how it turned out, right? It always comes down to the personality. And I would say, we do call it a failure in the group when it's a failed sway. But as I'm hearing you say that, I'm like, that's the wrong term. Why would it be a failure? And I'm thinking it's furthering that super negative perception of not getting what you want, and moving people away from the attitude of where they should be, probably a more healthy standpoint, which is you get the baby that you're meant to have. And as much as I like to say, we do have control over so many things in life, and this method can increase your chances. We've been tracking in the group for over 6 years, and we have an 87% success rate, which is great. But a lot of people don't get what they want, right? So 1 out of 10. And so what that means is, and I try to remind people, is that for those cases where you were unable to influence the chances or influence the outcome, you got the baby you were meant to have. And in some ways that can be a comforting thought, and just say, hey, I did everything I could. It's out of my hands, as are so many things in life. We plan. And most of the time the plans work. Sometimes they don't. And, so that's just one way to rationalize it, that, hey, this baby was meant to be, and meant to be for me and my family.
Oh, I love that. People can find you on the Facebook group. It's the Babydust Method Facebook group. They can Google that. And then do you guys have a website as well? I know there's a book, so go check out the book. It's available everywhere. When I Googled it earlier, it was like, what does Babydust Method mean? Why did you call it Babydust Method?
I have had so much flack for this, because I've gotten people saying, sounds like dusty crumbles of baby, kind of some weird images, right? Here's the real reason.
Sending you baby dust.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
You got it. Okay, so this is what happened in my early journey with baby swaying, and I was on these rudimentary websites back in the day when it was literally chat rooms, and
genderdreaming.com.
Yes, Gender Dreaming. I've been all over there.
I was a member.
Yes, and you came over to the good side. No, I'm just kidding. No, you know what? It's a similar community just after the same thing. But to your point, It is a good luck saying that is literally like sprinkling fairy dust on someone,
cute.
Good luck and best wishes, baby happy dust.
I love
Sending
it.
baby dust.
Sending baby dust. Good luck.
It's a part of the TTC forum, trying to conceive forums as well, which I was a part of.
Yes, you were.
When I was trying to conceive. I had secondary infertility.
She was TTC. She was giving me all the little abbreviations all the time. And I was like,
how many?
What?
DPO
I can't even.
you?
I need a key.
But you know what's so funny about these terms is it creates that sense of community. We're all in this together. She said baby dust to me. Only I know what that means. My husband doesn't know what that means. My girlfriends don't know what that means. It's a secret, a secret community, a secret tribe of people who are all wanting the same thing. And it makes you feel less alone and part of something bigger. So
that's right.
I was deep on the online communities. I was trying to conceive. I would join the trying to conceive online community month after month, trying to conceive July 2016, trying to conceive September. And you're all in this group together, and then you post your pictures of your little first response pregnancy test. Is the line getting darker? Okay, how many DPO did you get your BFP? And it's I'm so sad I got a BFN this morning, but it wasn't with first morning urine. So I'm going to try later tonight.
I'm going to wait.
I'm going to wait. I got so involved in the online stuff.
Oh my
gosh. I've been a part of so many. And even just recently I've been I've gotten addicted to Reddit recently, just at night time when I get the 30 minutes to myself and I'm not parenting all the children I have. I go on to Reddit and I've been what's the trying to conceive community over here? I'm just going to have a little pop in. It's this weird addiction. I've been doing this since I was 18, literally. Yeah. Since I was 18, on the bump and on all these crazy things when I way before I even wanted to have babies. Anyway, so you have created this wonderful, wonderful online community that feels so supportive of each other. Mm-hmm. I love going in, and even though I'm not actively trying to conceive at the moment, I still go in to the Facebook community and I read everyone's comments and people's journeys, and just seeing the love and the connection, and that it's just a safe place for people to land. It's so beautiful, and I think you should feel so proud of the work that you're doing. And I'm just so grateful that you decided to come on and share this. I know it's I know it's vulnerable to like come out and share all these things. And especially like in the climate that we're in right now, it's like can be taboo. But I really appreciate that like you've dedicated your life's work to this because you've helped so many people feel less alone. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I could say the exact same thing to both of you. Making women out there feel not alone in this crazy journey is absolutely commendable and so needed. And it's such an awesome part of modern technology and just getting to connect with people that we otherwise wouldn't be able to reach.
Yes.
It's absolutely amazing. So keep up the good work.
Oh,
Love it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kathryn.
Thank you. And you can follow Kathryn on @the Babydust Method on Instagram, and also jump on the Babydust Method Facebook group. You have to ask to be allowed in, and you and buy the book first, so you can really download everything that Kathryn has to say in the book, get all the specifics, and then jump into the community because it is so supportive and wonderful. And so thank you so much.
Awesome.
Oh, thank
you. Thank you. And you've been listening to the Mother Daze podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Bye, daisies.
Bye, daisies.